Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Beyond the Halo series, Real Talk with Women in Ministry. And I'm your host, Pastor Kathleen Panning. My guest today is the Reverend Kathryn Haueisen. And Kathy, as she is normally referred to, has a degree in journalism from Bowling Green State University in Ohio and a Master of Divinity degree from Wartburg Theological Seminary through the former Lutheran Seminary program of the Southwest in Austin, Texas. And that program focused on preparing people to serve in cross-cultural settings. She has been writing since sometime in the late 1960s with over 100 published articles in faith-based and secular publications and 6 published books. The last 2 are historical accounts of the impact of the Mayflower voyage. And Pastor Haueisen's church service includes being on the staff at 3 congregations, a few short-term interim calls, serving as executive director for the Melanchthon Institute in Houston and an ELCA outdoor ministry site in Texas, and director of an ELCA stewardship program to help congregations raise major funds for major projects. She retired in 2014 and has been focusing on writing for the past decade now. So, Kathy, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're able to have the time and get together to do this conversation about what it's like to be a woman in ministry. And you've stepped into, and that's kind of our theme for today, a lot of different roles in ministry since becoming a pastor. And, finding that way and stepping out into something new. How did that work for you? What did that feel like? What are some of the things you dealt with in doing that?
Well, one of my theories about leadership is leaders are neither born nor created. They are caught. You have a passion about something, you're in the right place at the right time. It needs to be done. There isn't anybody else around putting their hand up to say they'll do it. And then you have a compassion that this just needs to get done. And so you say, okay, I'll do it. I have frequently found myself in situations that I absolutely had no experience that matched up with the needs of what the challenge was. But there I was. It needed to be done, so I had to go do it.
That's interesting because in just before this call, I was taking another version of the Myers-Briggs personality inventory, which I took way back many decades ago, and what you just described is not something that everybody can do. Is just step out and say, okay, I've got the self-confidence to be able to step into something new that I've never done before, and to say, okay, it's a job that needs to be done. I'll learn what needs to be and get out there and do it.
Well, I would say I've never done it all by myself. I've always surrounded myself with people who did know. One of I figured out in college, there's an awful lot of stuff I not only don't know, I'm never going to figure out. So my plan B has always been to make friends with people who do know what I don't know, and rely on them for their wisdom and experience and information, and listen to them. Yeah.
That's so important. There are those of us who are kind of independent type people and kind of go off and do our own thing, and then there are those like you who know the value and really the necessity of having other good people around us to be able to help, especially when we're entering something new. Even if, like, you were on the staff of a couple of different congregations, and that may seem like old hat. Well, I've done it at this congregation, I can, but every situation is so different.
Every congregation has its own unique personality. So what worked in one place will not work in another place, not necessarily, not without adapting and adjusting. Yeah, and it takes a fair amount of discernment too to know if this is the right time and the right place to try and do this, or does this just really need to be postponed. For example, I was a camp director for 8 years in LaGrange, Texas, an ELCA outdoor ministry site.
Mhm.
And when I got there in 1996 and we started digging into the archives and the history of the place, we saw on the drawing board, even back then, the camp was established in 1954,
Wow.
plans for an adult retreat center with motel style housing for adults.
Mhm.
I was just at the dedication of that facility 2 weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
It was just finished in this past October. So it was a very long range dream.
Mhm.
And I didn't actually get to be part of that. I had done some other things for the camp to prepare it to be ready for this at some point in the future. But you have to know the right time. And if it's not working, maybe trying harder isn't the answer. Maybe back up and look, is there something else that needs attention uh, first? Or, yeah, something else has to happen before that can happen.
Yeah, yeah, that's, I think of my own ministry experiences too, and that the last congregation I served, they had been living with a leak in a flat roof in an education unit. And when my husband and I, we were serving together in that place, it got to the point where we set up kind of a brainstorming meeting with the congregation that
Mm-hmm.
who wanted to come, and said, okay, this roof obviously needs to be fixed. So what else? If we're going to do this, what else? And
Mm-hmm.
allowed people to dream and to think about what else. And one of the things they'd said was, we need an elevator,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
because they were carrying caskets up and
Oh
down,
my.
like 10 or 12 stone steps, which when it was wet or something
Oh,
like that, was very slippery. And
yeah.
they, allowing those things to percolate in their own time.
So my last official call before I retired was the director of a program within the ELCA to do capital campaigns for churches. We had a team of consultants that went and worked with churches. And one of the things we always asked during the training was, what's the so that for this project? And it's bigger than put in an elevator or repair a leaky roof. So that what? So that, well, people don't get wet when they come into your building, so that elderly people can get up or down to wherever, whatever is happening is taking place. There's always a bigger so what or so that. And I think people need to focus more on that and less on how much it's going to cost. I always thought of the money for ministry as the gas in the gas tank of the car. You certainly have to have it to make the car go anywhere. But my
Right.
goodness, you don't drive staring at the gas gauge. You glance at it occasionally to see if you're about to run out, but you can't stare at it and get anywhere. So I think sometimes we scare ourselves into focusing on the wrong priorities. And if we can lower our anxiety about it and get people thinking creatively and critically and see the bigger so that, the funds usually appear, and sometimes from really unanticipated sources.
Yeah, that's very true. People have to have a sense of ownership of it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and they also have to know the meaning and the purpose,
Yeah, yeah,
something that they can feel good about.
right.
Yeah, that's
Pe-
so that.
yes, people do not like to give money to problems. They like to give money to solutions and new things.
Hmm. And to fix something that's painful and broken.
But even that then is something new. So you're
Yeah,
closing out an unhappy chapter of history or ministry, so that you can step into a new chapter.
right, right.
Yeah.
That's a very important reminder, especially in this day and age. And for many congregations, this is a time when they're passing budgets and all of those kinds of things. Think
Yes.
about the new year and what are we going to be doing in the ministry and mission that's there to help people be able to step into something new,
Right. Right. Yeah.
to dream bigger. Have you had the experience of being in a place where a congregation is kind of stuck ever, and kind of unable to dream and see, and kind of when you're talking about staring at that gas gauge.
Yeah. I wouldn't say they were stuck particularly, but I was the associate pastor in an over 100-year-old congregation that had had a senior pastor for over 30 years that they
Mhm.
just loved. And then the next pastor who came essentially forbid them to talk about him at all.
Ooh.
And that man had a heart attack after a few years. And then the next pastor came, and I ended up being on staff with that pastor as an associate pastor.
Mhm.
Well, small world, I knew the adult sons of that very, very long-term pastor who had by since then died, but I knew his sons and one of his grandsons. And so I said, well, I'd love to hear some stories about these people when they were 3-year-olds running up and down the aisle and
Right.
not terrorizing the place, but being 3-year-olds.
Sure.
And so they told me a bunch of stories, and 6 months later, they moved his portrait out of the sanctuary and into the hall with other people's, and got on with it. It's like, so maybe they were stuck in their grief because they tried to suppress it instead of just acknowledging. They loved the man. That did not need to be a threat to future leadership, but it was until they really had a chance to kind of talk their way through all of that.
That's really interesting, because going into a place where there's been a long-term pastor can be a very big challenge.
Yes. Yes.
And I had kind of the opposite experience in my first parish, which was 2 small congregations where they were so used to cycling through first years, fresh out of seminary,
Mhm.
pastors who would be there for maybe 3 years and maybe 3.5. And I stayed 7.
They didn't know what to do with you after 3.5.
They didn't. And I started talking to them about some long range planning, and it was like this was totally foreign. They couldn't even conceive of that. And I began to feel like I was hitting my head against a brick wall and had no idea why, until after I was gone and figured this thing out.
Yeah.
But it can be on both ends of the spectrum. When
I think a lot of ministry and leadership is figuring out the right questions to ask, because the group wisdom is there, but we can't tap into it if we're asking the wrong questions. And I think that's more art than science. Again, I'm back to don't do it alone, get a team, and some collective thinking. And if one round of questions isn't working, back up and rethink it and try another approach. Because I think the people really want the place to thrive and succeed and do good in their community, but they don't often know what they need to do to make that happen.
Yeah. And I don't know about your seminary experience, but they didn't teach me some of that stuff.
No, I learned that in workshops after seminary.
Yeah.
But that's another important part. Keep going to clergy groups and workshops and special events, continuing education. Certainly academic things too, to keep your tools sharpened, but
Right.
The creative leadership kinds of seminars. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think they're starting in many seminaries nowadays to include some leadership training and things of that nature into the curriculum. But there's always only so much you can cram into the years of seminary training.
Right.
And I understand that, but it kind of like sometimes feeling thrown out into situation where, okay, now what?
Well, yes, and I don't know of all synods do this, but the ones I've been affiliated with have basically a mentor program for the first 3 years. So you have an assigned, older, wiser mentor working with you, and then some spatial continuing education events just for first call clergy, because some of their situations are unique to just people who are new at all of this. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's something they implemented after I came out.
Right. Well,
Did not have
you and I have been at it a while. Yes.
Yeah. So some of us are a little longer term in that.
Yes,
But
longer
but
in the teeth. Yeah.
but that's very wise that they have done that. You have also stepped into doing a lot of writing,
Yes.
and as something that you've been doing before, as I understand, before you went into ministry,
Yes.
um, and still doing that as something to that's different than what a lot of pastors do.
So,
Um,
yes, my plan was to be a writer. I majored in journalism in college with that understanding. I actually ended up in seminary because I was trying to get a master's in anything so that I could teach creative writing at the college level. And then along the way, it's a very long story we don't have time to get into, but I ended up then getting the Master of Divinity and taking a call to serve some parishes. But my original intent was always to write. So the years that I was doing parish ministry was just like one giant gap period of decades. I did write during those years, but not nearly as much. And it was always for, newsletters or specific columns for faith-based things. So yeah, I retired in 2014 and got after it and got serious about getting back to the writing. Started going to a lot of writing conferences instead of theological conferences, learned how much I did not know. And so I'm back to find people who know what you don't know, because that's a very large ocean, and you can easily drown in it if you try to do it alone.
yeah, and that that's something I also admire. I'm retired as well and stepped into doing a lot of the media things, which I really hadn't planned on doing when I was
Yes.
in ministry. But to find something meaningful once we retire, to step into something new, not leaving ministry totally behind, but it's a new kind of ministry.
Right, right, right.
And your two books on Mayflower, you have a personal connection to that. I'd like you to share with people a little bit about that.
Sure. My mother was a reference librarian, and she did the tedious work before computers and Google to document our family's connection to Elder William Brewster and his wife Mary, who got here on the Mayflower. I had always known that,
Mm,
and said, I'm glad Mom has a hobby to keep her busy, but I hadn't paid that much attention to it. But one of our daughters married into a very large Latino family in Houston, Texas, and my son-in-law's father has a very large percentage of Native American heritage, which
mm,
means the three grandchildren from that daughter's marriage are bicultural, which
mm,
proved to be very helpful. My education at LSPS, Lutheran Seminary Program in the Southwest, gave
mhm,
me a much better background to be interacting very, very closely with these people. We spent a lot of holidays together. We went to the school band concerts together. We spent a lot of time together until I moved north a couple of years ago. So that motivated me to really look into the story from the perspective of the Native Americans.
uh-huh,
And I think pendulums swing. So now there are some who think of it as a day of mourning instead of a day of Thanksgiving. I understand that, having studied as much as I have about it, but I don't think that's helpful. I also don't think it's helpful to claim undue credit for establishing the government that we know. Both cultures needed each other. That's the main thing I learned in my research. Both cultures were in very bad place, and they needed each other, and they came together. They
mm,
forged the treaty. They honored the treaty that allowed both of them to get through some really dark times. So kind of my current mission field is telling that story more fully and advocating for really getting to know people of other cultures and finding out where we have common interest, common opportunities. We have a lot more in common than we don't. But again, like focusing on the gas tank, we keep focusing on the differences, and we allow those differences to scare us and intimidate us because it's strange and new and weird. And like my daughter called me the evening of her first Thanksgiving with that family, and we weren't there. We were in another place, and she said, "But Mom, they ate off of paper plates." I said, but Carol, how many of them were there? Well, 30 or 35. I said,
Oh,
nobody
wow.
has that many china plates.
Yeah.
So of course they use paper plates. So
Yeah.
just, little things like that. We just have to, step
Mhm.
out there and say hi and get acquainted.
Yeah. And the other side of that is those differences can be fun, so
Yeah.
enriching, and it can be, it's like going to a banquet and you see all of these different dishes laid out, and you get to sample a lot of different things
Yes.
and
Yes. Yes.
all the different flavors that are there. So that's how I look at different cultures, as
Yeah.
to a wonderful
It's
banquet of
like it's
humanity.
it's traveling internationally without needing a passport or a plane ticket. It,
Yeah,
it can be a wonderful opportunity. Yeah.
right,
If
right.
we'll seize the day. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I've got a book coming out too that's called Tilted Halo. And the I got to,
Yeah. You need to show us your book.
well, no, I don't have the book with me yet, but it's the subtitle is Exposing the Truth of Women in Ministry and Untold Stories.
Hmm.
So, as women, we have a lot of untold stories. Many of them are similar to our male counterparts, but there's always the slight difference, the twist that it comes from being female in
Hmm.
traditionally male profession.
Yes.
And so that's why I'm doing these little series of interviews for people to hear some more of the stories.
Hmm.
Some
Absolutely.
of the women who are in ministry and have been in ministry, and hear some of your stories too.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
for people to know, your website is How Wise Then, those three words
Yes.
altogether.com.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I noticed that there's a slight typo of your name on the screen here. There's no H on the end. Uh,
Yeah. It's Haueisen.
yeah,
End of it. Yeah. And how wise then is a play on that name. The only people who can handle it without a tutorial are either German speakers or they've already met one of us.
yeah,
It's a tongue twister. Yeah.
right, right. But thank you so much for your time. And look, people should go and try and find the Mayflower Chronicles and learn some more about the Native American side of the story of Thanksgiving, which is just right
Yeah.
around the corner.
A week from Thursday. Yes.
Yeah.
Purchased the turkey yesterday. We do the traditional menu. Well,
Yeah.
thank you, Kathleen, so much for the opportunity to visit a little bit, and all the best to you with the launch of your book. I know that's a really large thing to accomplish.
Yeah. And my first try in this, so I'm kind of still dabbling in it, and hope maybe there will be another one someday.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
let's get this one out the door first.
right, right. Yeah, one baby at a time.
Right,
Right.
right.
Yeah. All right.
So
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it very much.
blessings to you, and may you have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and blessings to all of those who are watching
Okay,
as
thank
well.
you. Same to you. Take care. Bye
Take
bye.
care.